All right, welcome back to Lightroom. So today we're going to take a look inside of collections, how to set up collections, and what collections can do for you. Collections are located right here. They're under the Library tab. Now, collections are a great way to organize like images. What like means is really up to you and what you're trying to photograph. Whether it's a family member, a client, whatever you want, it lets you organize the images that you like into one location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just scroll down here to create collection set. So think of collection set as a folder, and inside of that folder we're going to have a series of different collections. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create collection set, and I'm just going to call this my great images. It's asking me if I want to put this collection set inside of another collection set, which I do not want to do because that would be kind of odd to have a folder within a folder like that. And we're just going to go ahead and hit create. So right here, we've created this new collection set. Now inside of this, we're going to create some collections. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is come up here to collections, and we are going to create a collection. And we want to put this collection set inside of my great images, which should have had an S, but that's okay. And we're going to call this after my dog, Jack. So I'm going to say Jack, who's my dog. And let's say I take photos of my dog all the time. Do we want to include the selected photos? So if I have any selected photos down here, do I want to include them? No, I don't want to do that at this point. Do I want to set this collection as my target, as my main collection? I'm not going to do that. And do you want to sync with Lightroom? These are all options just for right now because I don't actually use collections. We're not going to set that. I'm going to go ahead and hit create. So right here we have a collection set, and inside that collection we have a folder for Jack, who would be my dog. Now we can come down here and we can create another collection. So I can come and hit another collection, and we will do this one for Annabelle, who's my other dog, and we'll go ahead and hit create. You can see inside of this folder, we now have two collections. And every time I take a picture of one of those dogs, I can put it in this collection and it will automatically be there. You can also create what's called a smart collection. So a smart collection works on a series of variables. So what we're going to do is come down here to smart collection. And this is going to differ a little bit. In this one, we will do 5 stars. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this up. So any image that I have tagged that has 5 stars, it's automatically going to put it in this collection. This is going to go inside, once again, my great images collection set. Right here is where we start adding the variables or stuff that we want. Match all of the following rules, any of the following rules, or none of the following rules. This one, we're going to use all of the following rules. First thing is if the rating, and you could do pick a flag, if the color, if it has a smart preview, if the date is anything that you would want to put here, you could do, we're going to put rating is equal or greater to. So here's the second one we could do is, and then is not is greater than, but we're just going to put is 5 stars. We want you to put those images in this folder. Now you can come in here and add multiple rules for a collection. You do not have to just have one. We're going to go ahead and remove that, and I'm going to hit create. Any image that I've actually labeled as 5 stars automatically gets thrown into this folder that we have here. So that's a basic on collections. The last little thing we're going to cover is you can come in here and you can search within your collections, but that's basically how you create them. They're really easy to do. And if you use Lightroom as your main browser and editor, it's a wonderful tool. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to come over here and just touch on the develop module. And we're going to come in here and we're going to look at the basic module, which is this module right here. If you do not see the basic module, it should be the first one. If you can't find it, if you right click and hit show develop panel, make sure that it has the little tick mark and has been selected, but ours is there, so we are good to go. The first thing that we have here is what's called the histogram. Now the histogram just shows you where the data is in this image. So if we look at this image, there's no whites or no bright values in this image. So if we see or look down over here inside of the histogram, we'll notice that there's no data. Well, that's because it doesn't exist. You can see on this side, this is the shadow detail side, and it's showing, notice we have a lot of dark values, so we're going to have more information over here. Now we can shift this, and as we adjust this information, this histogram is going to change. All it's doing is showing you where the values are in your image. Right up here, you have these little triangles. This is for your highlights. This is for your shadows. If you select these boxes, and we'll go ahead and select them, what they're going to do is alert you when you're clipping, or in this case, your black values are too dark or your highlights are too bright. So what I'll do here is I'll make my blacks really dark. Now you notice we're getting this blue. It's saying, hey, this area is too dark. So what you would want to do is adjust a slider until that blue is removed, and then you know you have closer to the correct value. So this shows clipping. If you have this turned off and you adjust this, it's just going to get black. It's not going to show you that it's black unless you hover over it or turn it back on. So we'll go ahead and turn that off. I'm going to turn the highlight one on so we can adjust our highlights, and then I'll just adjust my exposure. Now you can see we've got some red in here. This means we are clipping the highlights, meaning we have no values left here in these areas. Now, most of the time you do not want to clip white areas. You want to hold detail in those values. Occasionally you do have an area which is pure white, and that's okay. But in this case, we don't obviously want to make something that bright. So that is showing us when we are clipping something in the image. This doesn't tell you that you've toned it correctly. It's just telling you that you've lost all and utter detail that you have in the image. So we're going to go ahead and hit reset. This is a helpful tool. If you're unsure if you've made something too bright, checking to see whether you've clipped your white or your blacks is definitely worthwhile. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip down this little bar, and we're going to come down here to basic. Our first thing is that we're either toning this in color, or if I was to click on this, in black and white. So we have the option to tone in color or black and white. For this image, we're just going to switch it back to color. The next thing we have is our camera profile. And if remember in the preferences, I set my camera profiles to be Adobe. So if I click on this, notice we're going to have Adobe Color, Adobe Landscape, Portrait, Standard, Vivid, and Monochrome. You can use your own camera profiles. That's where on that preferences I showed you where you could set it up for your specific camera and use the ones that are built into your camera. But in this case, we're just going to go ahead and use the Adobe ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and just click on these different ones. And you'll notice that the image will slightly change. So landscape is adding more saturation or vibrancy and a little more contrast. Portrait is going to flatten the image out and make it less vibrant. So is standard. And then the opposite, Adobe Vivid, is going to make everything more contrasty and more colorful. There's no right or wrong one. I usually use standard. I tend to like less saturated images, but it's always up to you as to what camera profile that you use and how they're used. So right over here, we have more profiles available. I can click on this. Now these first ones are showing you the Adobe ones. The next ones are my camera profiles and how I've set those up. And then they have some artistic kind of fancy ones. Really, these just tend to be just like the presets. We're not going to get into that, but it does have some camera profiles there. I'll pick this Adobe Neutral. We'll go ahead and hit close and we're good to go. So we have this Adobe Neutral, which is a little bit different profile from what we see there. The next step is to come down here And this is white balance or color balancing these images. So we have the option to come in here and use how the image was shot. We can use an auto where it's automatically picking the color balance, which it didn't do a good job. Most of the time it does. We can use a daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent. Basically the same settings that are on almost every single camera. I personally do not color balance most of the time in camera. Because I shoot raw all the time, it's much easier for me to just do it here on the computer rather than wasting time and color balancing on the camera, because most likely I'm going to change it anyways. So we're just going to leave this as shot. Most likely, whatever adjustment you pick isn't going to be perfect. We still have the ability to come in here and use these sliders to sort of fine tune that image. You can see this is going to be more blue, this is going to be more warm, this is going to be more green, and this is going to be more magenta. Now, the one thing that you need to watch out, if you take a lot of photographs of people, watch getting a person's face or skin tone magenta. Magenta is a really difficult color to mess around with or fix inside of any editing program. In this case, if you have magenta in the face, you're going to be much better at making it like yellow or green because we can fix that color. Magenta, you really can't adjust inside of Photoshop or Lightroom very easily, or at all, truthfully. So we can adjust those and kind of fine tune and get this image exactly where we want. So if I wanted to warm this image up a little bit, I could do that. If it was a little bit too yellow, I can add some magenta, and we can adjust this image and to get it basically visually how we think it should look. We have this little eyedropper here. This is a white balance tool. Now, because we don't have anything that's really a neutral gray or a neutral color, it probably won't work very good, but I can click on this and go in an area that should be a neutral gray and click it. Then it will color balance depending on the spot that I clicked on. Now, in this case, I knew it wasn't a neutral gray, so it's made this horrible cyan color. So we're just going to hit Command Z, which will undo the last step that we did. The next step is to come down here to auto tone. I'm not a huge fan of auto tone. I basically never use auto tone, and I will show you why, because auto tone most of the time doesn't do a great job, but occasionally it does work. The problem with auto tune is it needs to set a black and it needs to set a white. Now in this image, we don't have any white spots or white areas to set. So you're going to see that this is going to get way too bright because it's trying to set a white, and there isn't really a white to set in this image. And it basically adjusted these sliders here to get the best optimal tone. Now, if you don't like that, once again, just hit Command Z and that will undo it. And that's Control Z on a PC. Next thing that we have here is we have a slider, and you have 5 stops of variation, meaning you can go +5 or -5 this way, which is a lot in photography. So our exposure, we can increase that exposure or decrease that exposure depending on how we want this image to look. We have the contrast. We can make a flatter image or a contrastier image by sliding this slider right here. We can darken our highlights or brighten our highlights with this little slider right here. We can open up our shadows or darken our shadows with this slider right here. We can control our whites, so we can make our whites whiter or our whites darker by sliding that slider. I'm not a big fan of this slider. Now these things can be difficult to kind of move around and get back to 0. If you want to set something back at a default rather than trying to come in here and get it right at 0, all you need to do is double click on the word and it will set it back to 0. This one will change our black point. We can increase our black point or decrease our black point. Once again, double click that, set it to 0. We can increase the texture or decrease the texture of an image. It almost kind of softens the image. We can increase clarity. We can decrease clarity. Clarity is almost like a combination of contrast and sharpening at the same time. If we need to use dehaze, and in this case we don't really, we can increase that or decrease that. Once again, double click, puts it back at 0. If we want to increase our vibrance or decrease our vibrance, we can slide that slider. And then we have saturation, where we can increase the saturation or decrease the saturation. Now, this is a great panel, but what you have to remember is it is a global adjustment. Every one of these adjustments affects everything in the whole image. A lot of times you do not want to affect the whole image. And in that case, we're going to kind of slide over here. We would use this adjustment brush. Well, it lets us do selective adjustments inside of Lightroom. A good rule of thumb is if you make an adjustment, so let's say we wanted to make this area brighter. As I slide this, it's making this area brighter, but it's also ruining this area and making this area too bright. What you don't want to do is make an adjustment to make one area look good and one area look bad. So in this case, making this brighter really isn't helping this image too much because it's ruining the other parts of the image. I can double click that and maybe I'll make it a little bit brighter, but basically I'm going to want to come in and use the adjustment brush where I can selectively apply a color or exposure adjustment to one area versus everything in the whole image. And what you'll find out is most adjustments in photography tend to be selective, not global. And that is the basic panel inside of Adobe Lightroom. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.